Some 2 weeks before Shavat, a sunny spring day, people strolled seemingly carefree through the crowded streets. They exchanged cheerful greetings. Children played games, rolling hazelnuts on the sidewalks. Some schoolmates and I were in Ezra Malik's garden studying a Talmudic treatise. Night fell. Some 20 people had gathered in our courtyard. My father was sharing some anecdotes and holding forth on his opinion of the situation. He was a good storyteller. Now remember, the townspeople were on page 12, the bottom half. Right, just go until you see regular numbers. Yeah, there's a foreword and an introduction and a preface. Remember, in the town, the people really respected his father, so I would look to him for advice and for leadership. Suddenly the gate opened, and Stern, a former shopkeeper who now was a policeman, entered and took my father aside. Despite the growing darkness, I could see my father turn pale. "What's wrong?" we asked. "I don't know. I have been summoned to a special meeting of the council. Something must have happened." The story he had interrupted would remain unfinished. "I'm going right now," he said. "I'll return as soon as possible. I'll tell you everything. Wait for me." We were ready to wait as long as necessary. The courtyard turned into something like an antechamber to an operating room. We stood, waiting for the door to open. Neighbors, hearing the rumors, had joined us. We stared at our watches. Time had slowed down. What was the meaning of such a long session? "I have a bad feeling," said my mother. "This afternoon I saw new faces in the ghetto. 2 German officers. I believe they were Gestapo. Since we've been here, we have not seen a single officer." It was close to midnight. Nobody felt like going to sleep, though some people briefly went to check on their homes. Others left but asked to be called as soon as my father returned. At last the door opened and he appeared. His face was drained of color. He was quickly surrounded. Tell us what's happening. Say something." At that moment, we were so anxious to hear something encouraging, a few words telling us that there was nothing to worry about, that the meeting had been routine, just a review of welfare and health problems. But one glance at my father's face left no doubt. "The news is terrible," he said at last, and then one word: transports. The ghetto was to be liquidated entirely. Departures were to take place street by street, starting the next day. We wanted to know everything, every detail. We were stunned, yet we wanted to fully absorb the bitter news. Where will they take us? That was a secret for all except one, the president of the Jewish Council. But he would not tell, or could not tell. The Gestapo had threatened to shoot him if he talked. So do you remember what liquidate means? What?
Yep.
What does it mean?
It means like to remove.
Yep, to remove, to delete, to get rid of. "There are rumors," my father said, his voice breaking, "that we are being taken somewhere in Hungary to work in the brick factories. It seems that here we are too close to the front." After a moment's silence, he added, "Each of us will be allowed to bring his personal belongings. A backpack, some food, a few items of clothing, nothing else." Again, heavy silence. "Go and wake the neighbors," said my father. "They must get ready." The shadows around me roused themselves as if from a deep sleep and left silently in every direction. Now, so all of these people are going to pack a backpack, some food, and a few items of clothing. Do you think they'll be allowed to keep them? Thinking about Nazis, probably not. But again, it gives them a sign of hope so that they don't panic. This is why all this secrecy. The Nazis didn't want people panicking. For a moment, we remained alone. Suddenly, Basha Reich, a relative who lived with us, entered the room. "Someone is knocking at the sealed window, the one that faces outside." It was only after the war that I found out who had knocked that night. It was an inspector of the Hungarian police, a friend of my father's. Before we entered the ghetto, he had told us, "Don't worry, I'll warn you if there is danger." Had he been able to speak to us that night, we might still have been able to flee. But by the time we succeeded in opening the window, it was too late. There was nobody outside. So this was opportunity number 3 his family could have had to leave and to escape. The ghetto was awake, one after the other. The lights were going on behind the windows. I went to the house of one of my father's friends. I woke the head of the household, a man with a gray beard and the gaze of a dreamer. His back was hunched over from untold nights spent studying. "Get up, sir, get up. You must ready yourself for the journey. Tomorrow you will be expelled, you and your family, you and all the other Jews." "Where to? Please don't ask me, sir. Don't ask questions. God alone could answer you. For heaven's sake, get up." He had no idea what I was talking about. He probably thought I had lost my mind. "What are you saying? Get ready for the journey. What journey? Why? What is happening? Have you gone mad?" Half asleep, he was staring at me, his eyes filled with terror, as though he expected me to burst out laughing and tell him to go back to sleep, to dream that nothing had happened. It was all in jest. My throat was dry and the words were choking me, paralyzing my lips. There was nothing else to say. At last he understood. He got out of bed and began to undress automatically. Then he went over to the bed where his wife lay, sleeping, and with infinite tenderness touched her forehead. She opened her eyes, and it seemed to me that a smile crossed her lips. Then he went to wake his 2 children. They woke with a start, torn from the dreams. I fled. Time went by quickly. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning. My father was running right and left, exhausted, consoling friends, checking with the Jewish council just in case the order had been rescinded. To the last moment, people clung to hope. The women were boiling eggs, roasting meat, preparing cakes, sewing backpacks. The children were wandering about aimlessly, not knowing what to do with themselves to stay out of the way of the grown-ups. Our backyard looked like a marketplace. Valuable objects, precious rugs, silver candlesticks, Bibles and other ritual objects were strewn over the dusty grounds, pitiful relics that seemed never to have had a home. All this under a magnificent blue sky. By 8 o'clock in the morning, weariness had settled into our veins, our limbs, our brains like molten lead. I was in the midst of prayer when suddenly there was shouting in the streets. I quickly unwound my phylacteries and ran to the window. Hungarian police had entered the ghetto and were yelling in the street nearby. "All Jews outside, hurry!" They were followed by Jewish police, who, their voices breaking, told us, "The time has come. You must leave all this." The Hungarian police used their rifle butts, their clubs to indiscriminately strike old men and women, children and cripples. One by one, the houses emptied and the streets filled with people carrying bundles. By 10 o'clock, everyone was outside. The police were taking roll calls once, twice, 20 times. The heat was oppressive. Sweat streamed from people's faces and bodies. Children were crying for water. Water! There was water close by inside the houses, the backyards, but it was forbidden to break rank. "Water, mother, I am thirsty." Some of the Jewish police surreptitiously went to fill a few jugs. My sister and I were still allowed to move about as we were destined for the last convoy, and so we helped as best we could. So they're all out, they're on the sidewalk, they're not supposed to be going anywhere, getting anything, and it's hot and they're thirsty. At last, 1 o'clock in the afternoon came the signal to leave, so 3 hours they've been outside. There was joy. Yes, joy. People must have thought there could be no greater torment in God's hell than that of being stranded here on the sidewalk among the bundles in the middle of the street under a blazing sun. Anything seemed preferable to that. They began to walk without another glance at the abandoned streets, the dead empty houses, the gardens, the tombstones. On everyone's back there was a sack. In everyone's eyes, tears and distress. Slowly, heavily, the procession advanced toward the gate of the ghetto. And there I was on the sidewalk, watching them file past, unable to move. Here came the chief rabbi, hunched over, his face strange, looking without a beard, a bundle on his back. His very presence in the procession was enough to make the scene seem surreal. It was like a page torn from a book, a historical novel perhaps, dealing with the captivity in Babylon or the Spanish Inquisition. They passed by me, one after the other, my teachers, my friends, the others, some of whom I had once feared, some of whom I had found ridiculous, all those whose lives I had shared for years. There they went, defeated, their bundles, their lives in tow, having left behind their homes, their childhood. They passed by me like beaten dogs, with never a glance in my direction. They must have envied me. The procession disappeared around the corner. A few steps more and they were beyond the ghetto walls. The street resembled fairgrounds deserted in haste. There was a little of everything: suitcases, briefcases, bags, knives, dishes, banknotes, papers, faded portraits, all the things one planned to take along and finally left behind. They had ceased to matter. Open rooms everywhere. Gaping doors and windows looked out into the void. It all belonged to everyone, since it no longer belonged to anyone. It was there for the taking, an open tomb, a summer sun. So they had put all this stuff out thinking maybe they could carry some of it with them, but of course they weren't allowed to. And what happens as all this stuff is left out? Who comes back and kind of picks over it? The soldiers, the Hungarian police, the German soldiers who were in the town. There were things that were very, very valuable that were left behind that ended up in German hands. We had spent the day without food, but we were really not hungry. We were exhausted. My father had accompanied the deportees as far as the ghetto's gate. They first had been herded through the main synagogue, where they were thoroughly searched to make sure they were not carrying away gold, silver, or any other valuables. There had been incidents of hysteria and harsh blows. When will it be our turn? I asked my father. The day after tomorrow, unless things work out. A miracle, perhaps. So they're taking out small groups at a time. They're not trying to take out the entire ghetto at one time. Where were the people being taken? Did anyone know yet? Nope, the secret was well kept. Night had fallen. That evening we went to bed early. My father said, "Sleep peacefully, children. Nothing will happen until the day after tomorrow, Tuesday." Monday went by like a small summer cloud, like a dream in the first hours of dawn. Intent on preparing our backpacks, on baking breads and cakes, we no longer thought about anything. The verdict had been delivered. That evening, our mother made us go to bed early to conserve our strength, she said. It was to be the last night spent in our house. I was up at dawn. I wanted to have time to pray before leaving. My father had risen before all of us to seek information in town. He returned around 8 o'clock. Good news, we were not leaving town today. We were only moving to the small ghetto. That is where we were to wait for the last transport. We would be the last to leave. At 9 o'clock, the previous Sunday's scenes were repeated. Policemen wielding clubs were shouting, "All Jews outside!" We were ready. I went out first. I did not want to look at my parents' faces. I did not want to break into tears. We remained sitting in the middle of the street, like the others 2 days earlier. The same hellish sun, the same thirst, only there was no one left to bring us water. I looked at my house in which I had spent years seeking my God, fasting to hasten the coming of the Messiah, imagining what my life would be like later. Yet I felt little sadness. My mind was empty. "Get up, roll call." We stood, we were counted, we sat down, we got up again, over and over. We waited impatiently to be taken away. What were they waiting for? Finally, the order came. "Forward march!" My father was crying. It was the first time I saw him cry. I had never thought it possible. As for my mother, she was walking, her face a mask, without a word, deep in thought. I looked at my little sister, Zipporah, her blonde hair neatly combed, her red coat over her arm, a little girl of 7. On her back, a bag too heavy for her. She was clenching her teeth. She already knew it was useless to complain. Here and there, the police were lashing out with their clubs. Faster! I had no strength left. The journey had just begun, and I already felt so weak. Faster, faster! Move, you lazy good-for-nothings, the Hungarian police were screaming. That was when I began to hate them, and my hatred remains our only link today. They were our first oppressors. They were the first faces of hell and death. They ordered us to run. We began to run. Who would have thought that we were so strong? From behind their windows, from behind their shutters, our fellow citizens watched as we passed. There's an interview with Elie Wiesel and Oprah Winfrey that I typically show also, but we just don't have time for. They go back to Auschwitz, and that's one of the things he talked about. All he remembers is running everywhere. They didn't want prisoners to walk. We finally arrived at our destination. Throwing down our bundles, we dropped to the ground. O God, Master of the universe, in your infinite compassion, have mercy on us. The small ghetto. So they've moved from the large ghetto to the small ghetto. Only 3 days ago, people were living here, people who owned the things we were using now. They had been expelled, and we had already forgotten all about them. The chaos was even greater here than in the large ghetto. Its inhabitants evidently had been caught by surprise. I visited the rooms that had been occupied by my Uncle Mendel's family. On the table, a half-finished bowl of soup, a platter of dough waiting to be baked. Everywhere on the floor there were books. Had my uncle meant to take them along? What do you think happened to the people in the small ghetto?
They're probably just tossed out.
And taken where?
Replacement.
And what were those places called? No?
Concentration.
Thank you. Concentration camps. So they would move people in stages, again, to reduce the amount of panic. We settled in. What a word. I went looking for wood. My sisters lit a fire. Despite her fatigue, my mother began to prepare a meal. So they're living in these other people's houses. We cannot give up. We cannot give up, she kept repeating. People's morale was not so bad. We were beginning to get used to the situation. There were those who even voiced optimism. The Germans were running out of time to expel us, they argued. Tragically, for those who had already been deported, it would be too late. As for us, chances were that we would be allowed to go on with our miserable little lives until the end of the war. The ghetto was not guarded. One could enter and leave as one pleased. Maria, our former maid, came to see us. Sobbing, she begged us to come with her to her village, where she had prepared a safe shelter. Chance number 4 to leave. My father wouldn't hear of it. He told me and my big sisters, if you wish, go there. I shall stay here with your mother and the little one. Naturally, we refused to be separated. Night. No one was praying for the night to pass quickly. The stars were but sparks of the immense conflagration that was consuming us. Were this conflagration, that's just a fancy word for a fire, to be extinguished one day, nothing would be left in the sky but extinct stars and unseeing eyes. There was nothing else to do but to go to bed, in the beds of those who had moved on. We needed to rest, to gather our strength. At daybreak, the gloom had lifted, the mood was more confident. There were those who said, who knows? They may be sending us away for our own good. The front is getting closer. We shall soon hear the guns, and then surely the civilian population will be evacuated. They worry lest we join the partisans. As far as I'm concerned, this whole business of deportation is nothing but a big farce. Don't laugh, they just want to steal our valuables and jewelry. They know that it has all been buried and they will have to dig to find it. So much easier to do when the owners are on vacation. On vacation? This kind of talk that nobody believed helped pass the time. The few days we spent here went by pleasantly enough in relative calm. People rather got along. There no longer was any distinction between rich and poor, notables and the others. We were all people condemned to the same fate, still unknown. Saturday, the day of rest, was the day chosen for our expulsion. The night before, we had sat down to the traditional Friday night meal. We had said the customary blessings over the bread and the wine and swallowed food in silence. We sensed that we were gathered around the familial table for the last time. I spent that night going over memories and ideas and was unable to fall asleep. At dawn, we were in the street ready to leave. This time, there were no Hungarian police. It had been agreed that the Jewish Council would handle everything by itself. Our convoy headed toward the main synagogue. The town seemed deserted, but behind the shutters, our friends of yesterday were probably waiting for the moment when they could loot our homes. The synagogue resembled a large railroad station, baggage and tears. The altar was shattered, the wall covering shredded, the walls themselves bare. There were so many of us we could hardly breathe. The 24 hours we spent there were horrendous. The men were downstairs, the women upstairs. It was Saturday, the Sabbath, and it was as though we were there to attend services. Forbidden to go outside, people relieved themselves in a corner. The next morning, we walked toward the station, where a convoy of cattle cars was waiting. The Hungarian police made us climb into the cars, 80 persons in each one. They handed us some bread, a few pails of water. They checked the bars on the windows to make sure they would not come loose. The cars were sealed. One person was placed in charge of every car. If someone managed to escape, that person would be shot. 2 Gestapo officers strolled down the length of the platform. There, they were all smiles. All things considered, it had gone very smoothly. A prolonged whistle pierced the air. The wheels began to grind. We were on our way. So in terms of events, the other handout you have looks like this. And if you review the video from Monday, you'll get some more help with filling out these first 2 rows. But basically what you do is you put a major event, how the townspeople responded, and then what happens next. And then you put another major event, how the townspeople responded, and what happened next. And where we ended with on Monday was they had been moved to the large ghetto, and that lives were coming back to normal. So what happens today? What are major events for today? In those pages that we just read through. And move to where? Okay. So they've been living in the large ghetto. Don't worry where it says chapter 2. We're just going to do all of this. Will be chapter 1 for you guys. So they're moved from the large ghetto to the small ghetto. How do the townspeople respond to that?
Somewhat upset by it.
Okay.
Perfectly comprehensive.
They try to do the normal things, the cooking. And the small ghetto wasn't guarded, so they could come and go as they pleased if they chose to. And then what happens? Taken, now where are they going? Well, we don't know, right? What are they being loaded onto? Yeah, the cow cars. Well, we kind of forgot one in between there. As they're in the small ghetto, who comes?
Kind of a maid.
Yes. What does she offer them?
Someplace else.
Mm-hmm. How does Ellie's father respond? He tells Ellie and his two older sisters, you guys can go if you want to, but we'll decide to get stay together. I'm going to leave this on the board for you so that tomorrow morning you come in and finish this up, and then that way you can go ahead and have it done and submit it tomorrow. But again, all of this will just be on chapter 1. I'll summarize chapter 2 for you. Or it's super short. If you're interested, you can read it also. It's going to talk about their experiences on the train.